Thank you for joining me for another episode of Each Bring a Poem. I'm your host, Yael Valencia Aldana, and in this podcast, writers and poets bring in their favorite poem to discuss, or we talk about their work.
Welcome to another episode of Each Bring a Poem. I am super excited to have with me today Jennifer Maritza McCauley.
Hello.
She graciously is joining us today to talk about her collection, Kinds of Grace, which, if you do not have, you should thunder to your local bookstore to get your local independent bookstore. And if you're getting it from another source, don't tell us, but get this book. Okay. She is the author of the cross-genre collection, Scar On, Scar Off, which received an IPPY award. And when trying to return home, a short story collection, which was a New York Times editor's best choice. That was the New York Times reader. Called one of the best fiction books of the year, according to Kirkus Review, a must-read of 2023 by Chicago Library, and the most anticipated by today. She received her MFA in creative writing from Florida International University and PhD in creative writing and literature from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Is it Missouri or Missouri?
Oh, that's a good one. Cool. My dad says Missouri. I say Missouri, but I'm from Pittsburgh. So my dad's from Missouri. I keep going back.
I am so confused. she has been granted fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts, Kimball. How do you say that?
Kimbilio.
Kimbilio. Okay, see. Kimbilio and Canto Mundo. She teaches at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and is the fiction editor of Pleiades. I said that wrong. How do you say that?
That's good. It sounds good.
I have dyslexia. This is my excuse. Okay. Good. So we would be so honored if you would read from your collection.
Yes, absolutely.
Yay.
Okay. Okay. So this first poem is called Aren't You Afraid? If I go down, I'll go down whistling. Find me border busting, singing the meanest songs. I stopped waiting for any new man. I tramp and burn and tussle. I soar without stopping. Your old light dims darker, but I see perfectly fine. Yesterday, you asked me, aren't you afraid of the truck dipped in night growing closer, of the men who ripple the hills poised to rush down? I said, I live in motion. I neither rush nor slumber. Sure, fear is the trickiest insect, but I already swatted him down. Alrighty, let's see. The next one I think I'm going to read is Happy Day, because you know what? It's nothing wrong with being happy. Happy Day. What if I spent the day with face blasted by shine, with sparks alighting the long parts of my aging face? What if I spent the day in stride with you, never wondering if you'd see me? I'd just be affixed to your God-smeared eyes. What a day that would be. I wouldn't worry about scarcity or want, failure or low feeling. What if the day was as it is, brightly skinless and naked, drenched in swallowing yellow? That'd be great. Let's do it this way. Here, your fingers can become my fingers, and we'll walk like this, intertwined, perhaps skipping like children. Let's see this out as it should be. Today, we will be sopping with light. All right, thank you. And since I guess I'm reading kind of more positive poems today, I'm also going to read this poem called Wedding Day. I got married recently, and this is what it's about. So the little quote at the top by Jan Leonard, who's the woman who married me. Says, God knew your needs when he brought you together. He knew exactly what you needed to make you complete. And there's a poem. Violet flora buds, fragrant fumed, ivory linens hanging lush, dress sequined and flowing huge, bodies restricting breath. I think of you when I get ready. The time before I see you brazenly stretches on. After I am done, they tell me to look to the window. When I see you, then I can walk. I'm in the space without you, yearning. When I am most nervous, I clutch your hand, but you aren't here when I am most afraid. Before they took me to that mental hospital, they snatched you from me too. I think of that time again. When they say my name, I'm startled. Weak-kneed, they lead me to my parents who wait with upturned mouths. My song comes on and I'm walking. Parents steady me and I'm moving strong. I see you. You're not too far off. When I reach you, your eyes are soft and trembling. When I see you, I sob. As the officiant talks, you fill my vision. Normal-mouthed eyes glinting sweetly. You are you, and fear bursts easily. When I'm with you, everything becomes free-feeling and comfortable. You are not just husband. You are limb, finger, toe, snapped rib. When the officiant asks me to repeat after her, there's you. When I make my vow, there's you. In the morning, with fuming coffee poured, there's you. In the evening, when chilly wine clinks, there you are. Here in this moment, I see you as if I'd known you since birth. And here in this moment, I say the officiant's words as if they are my own. Do you promise to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, remaining faithful to him as long as you both shall live? I do, I do, I do, I promise to find you if you sprint off searching. I promise to tuck you in when the air quiets quick. I promise to kiss you to sleep when the nights come screeching. I promise to stand by your bedside when you can't rise. I promise to call you to talk about penumbras. I promise to keep you safe if trouble comes calling fierce. I promise to love you with full aching love until death splits us. I promise I'll call you mine until my lips can't wriggle or move. I promise to love you because you will always be the most glorious distance between 2 points. All right? And that's what I have for today.
Wow. Thank you. And, I am going to come clean. I requested wedding day, which is so unusual for me because I don't tilt romantic. But that was just, to me, extraordinary poem. And I'll get into more of this later. It's a more plain song poem. And where, when I say plain song, I mean plainer language, and you have some really exquisite wordsmithing poems. So to have this one be more plain song was just like a nice contrast in there. And so you're breathing, you're taking a little breath with the language, but the emotion is like so strongly there. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Jennifer has generously allowed me to read one of mine, which is in conversation with hers. So this is called For You. After Ada Lamont. There was a time in the Pantheon, the time before quasars, the time before penumbras were invented, the time before souls, when we were twins clung together, brothers, sisters, who knows? But one skin, one gossamer bubble of thread, dark eye to dark eye. The residue adheres, sticky filaments on the wing. It arrows, it winnows, stretches thin as mylar. It is the most tapered kind of affection.
Wow, beautiful, incredible. I love the
Yeah,
penumbra.
so yeah, I know, penumbra.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic.
So I'm going to start off by asking you some questions that people have asked me. I thought were pretty good. First of all, how long did it take you to pull this collection together?
Yeah, so I started in about 2018. I'd finished Scar on Scar Off. It came out in 2017. That was my first book. And it says poems on it, but it's more of a hybrid book. So it's kind of prose and poetry. And I had these extra poems, but I didn't know what to do with them. So I just kind of let them go. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to put them anywhere. And I'll just work on a collection someday because I didn't know what I wanted to write next in terms of poetry. But I was solicited by Jasmine Mendez, who's an absolutely fantastic poet, to write for her Afro-Latino issue. And I wrote a poem for that. And then I was solicited by Roque South Rivera to write a poem for Puerto Rico en Mi Corazón anthology. And I started accumulating more poems, like, okay, I'm starting to see where I'm going. Is this going to be about, is this going to be like cultural intersections or something like that? And then I just put it aside and finished my short story collection, which should come out last year. Um, so I kept working, I just kept writing poems on the side. And I went through this sort of mental health crisis right after I finished my PhD. And then what I realized, and I went to Fort Pierce to kind of recover, and also I started remote teaching from there. Um, and while I was there, I started writing poems to sort of kind of deal with the situation and also kind of deal with myself. So I just wrote lots and lots and lots of poems, and a lot of them didn't make it into the book. So that ended up, giving me a kind of arc. And then I moved to Houston, and then I kind of got a lot of experiences there and ended up strengthening myself and getting a lot stronger from that problem, not problem, but that situation. Um, so after that, I realized I had like 30, 40 poems, and I was like, I think I could write a book. I think maybe this is a book needs to come together. And so I just kept writing more poems um, on all sorts of different subjects, as you can probably see in there. And then I started winnowing things out. And then it finished in about 2022, and I thought I had a collection together. So it was from 2018 to 2022 that I was working on these poems. Um, and then on a whim, I was just like, I'm just going to send it out. And, because I saw that a lot of folks that I admire were on Flower Song. So I thought, okay, I'll send my book to them and just see what happens. And I didn't even have a submission um, plan. I just was like, okay, I finished this book and maybe this is a press that I want to go on to. And then they accepted it like a couple of days later, like 4 days later. I was like, oh the heavens. Okay, so this is meant to be. Because I thought, I probably would have kept sending it out, but if they didn't accept it, but I was really happy that that happened. And they just, gave me a lot of creative control over the book, and I had a lot of fun writing it. So it got me through a lot, and yeah. So that was the process.
Wow. They have been on my radar, and yeah, they do have quite a few people on there that I admire. And I can't remember if I submitted my stuff to them or not. I might have. No, wait. I think I didn't, and I thought I did because when my collection was accepted and I sent out letters up to withdraw, they were like, "Yeah, you didn't send us anything though." But they are a wonderful press, and you have beautiful, evocative art in here in conversation with these poems. How did it come about that you I'll just make it very broad. How did it come about that the art is included in the book?
Yeah, so the book was already done, and it was almost ready to like it was almost done. It wasn't almost ready to go because I had a little more time left on it, but it was close to being done. And just randomly, I thought, this book is so much about family, it's so much about culture, it's so much about kind of finding yourself that the people along the way really helped me. I would love to have them included somehow. And my cousin, her name is Maritza, and she's the reason why I have the middle name Maritza. I was named after her. She's a beautiful artist, and I asked her if I could use some of her artwork for my book, and she said yes. And I was really excited. And my mother-in-law, Carol Ward, does weavings and she does paintings and things like that. And I wrote a poem for her in this book, and I asked her if she would include some of her art too. So they both got together. So it ended up being this sort of more of a family book than I really realized it was.
Hmm.
But they came together, and then those poems and those images sort of complement the poems, at least ideally.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of my loves. And I'll just mention that I work with a press, Purple Ink Press, and our one of our fundamental tenets is that words go with images. So in our books, words are always paired with images. And I have to say, I mean, it's in color, honey. It's
Yeah.
in color,
Oh,
and
yeah.
color's more expensive to print. How did this conversation go with Flower Song?
Well, I just asked them. I was just like, "Can I use these images?" And they said, "Yeah," and then they just took care of the rest. So I don't know what they were doing, but it was cool that they did it. So, yeah.
Actually, someone else had posted your collection online, and they were showing these images because I was gonna wait a minute to get it, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, there's color art in here. So I had to get it, so that I can see that, because I've been a visual artist for years. Um, so to me, it's a real divine sweet spot pairing creative words with images, and I think they work really well. Um, and it added another layer to me because of the type of imagery. And so this is nostalgia. This is one of my favorite pieces in here.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah.
So it definitely adds, like, sometimes, you'll have images even like in a journal or something, and you're like, what does that go with? That doesn't go with anything. Um, but these are different, and they really add to it. So I was really thrilled to see them, and that they were in color as well. So you said that Flower Song gave you a lot of freedom, creative freedom. Um, did you have an editor? Did you work with an editor?
Yeah, so I worked with Avery Castillo and Edward Vidawade, and they're the ones that kind of run the press. They also have typesetters. There's a lot of folks that are there, but he kind of let me do, what I wanted to do. There weren't a lot of conversations. There were conversations, but it wasn't like to a point in which I felt like the entire book was getting restructured, or, like it wasn't, the book that I envisioned. So you can kind of, yeah, he definitely lets you do a lot of the things that you would like to do with the book. So I appreciated that. And that's what I was kind of looking for this book too. I wanted a little bit of freedom to kind of play around. So I appreciated that. Yeah.
And I know that your first book was a hybrid.
Yeah.
Um, and then your second book is short stories.
Yes.
Now, a lot of time, because I'm a multi-genre writer. I say just say I'm a writer. Usually I go, I'm a writer. And then people go, of what? What do you write? What? And I'm like, I write poetry, nonfiction, and fiction. Because it's like they gotta get it out of me.
Mm.
And in our community, a lot of people will only write poems, or only write nonfiction, or only write fiction. And I'm not sure if it's unusual. It seems to be unusual to be a multi-genre writer. How did you come to be a multi-genre writer? Why did you not just like, okay, I'm getting on this poetry train here, or the fiction train?
Yeah. So I think that I loved reading poetry and novels and short story collections when I was a kid. I love reading both of those genres. And I like reading memoirs as well. I think I gravitated the most toward fiction and poetry. But I've always loved creative nonfiction too. So um but when I was a kid, I was writing poetry all the time. I loved writing little poems in my books, but I was also writing little novels. So I think I was just writing them both at the same time.
Little novels, I
Yeah,
love
just
it.
little, no, they were like these tiny little notebooks, like this big, I don't know, like this big, and they had all my stories in them. I would give them to my mom, and yeah, so I was always writing, but um it was always fiction and poetry for some reason. And when I was in my undergrad, I got my degree in English writing, and I specialized in fiction, but I was a TA for poetry, so I was still doing both at the same time. And then when I was going for my MFA, I really kind of hit up a wall, and I was just like, am I going to go for poetry? Am I going to go for fiction? Because when I was applying for MFA programs, um, most of them, they just wanted you to pick a genre. And for me, I didn't even know which genre to pick. So I was just like, I don't know. But then I had a novel idea and a short story collection idea. So I thought, okay, I'll go for fiction. But even while I was at FIU for fiction, I was taking poetry classes with Denise, and I was hanging out with the poets. So I was always into that. But when I did my PhD in Columbia, Missouri, I did it for fiction as well, but I still kept writing poetry. And I was part of the poetry scene, and I met this wonderful, wonderful poet named Monica A. Hand. Um, and she was also a Cave Canem poet. And she's really fantastic. And she brought me into the circle. She set me up with my first reading. And I didn't have any books. I didn't have anything, like I didn't have many poems. I was like, I don't think I have enough poems for a whole reading. And she's like, it doesn't She's like, you'll have enough. You can do it. So she sent me with my first reading of poetry, and it was at Stevens College, and that was really special. And I started doing open mics and one mics poetry just to get in that scene while I was doing my PhD in fiction. And then eventually I put a book together from all the stuff that I was working on. So when I finished my PhD, I had a short story collection, but I also had a lot of poetry too. So I still kept doing both. I could just not do both. And I've written some lyric essays too, but I think that my brain just works that way. It gets into a genre and I kind of feel comfortable there. But then after that, I'm just like, nah, well, what else is out there? Let me see what other people are doing in this genre. And then just want to play around. So I say I get bored easily. So I like to play around with different things.
I mean, to me, that sounds very natural, and that's sort of how I roll. The women that I gravitated to, um, and I looked up to and wanted to be like as writers were Margaret Atwood specifically and Sandra Cisneros, and they're all multi-genre. So I thought this is what you
Oh,
do.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I did it. Toni Morrison as well, but to me, Toni Morrison is like a sun shining so bright. It's like you almost can't even look
yeah.
directly at her career. So I couldn't even imagine molding myself after Toni Morrison because she is just a spectacular creature with this unattainable or this amazing talent.
Yeah.
Um, so after I read Beloved in undergrad, and I was so stunned by its beauty, and I didn't because I love to reread books. I did not reread that book
Mm.
for probably 20 years until I had to when I
Mm.
was in a master's program because it was just so shockingly good.
Right.
It was beautiful, and the way the prose is weighted is so lovely and divine. And it's almost like I was so shocked by it. It's almost like I had to be right in the right mind space
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
absorb it again. And then I had to. And then it became a whole thing, which I probably shouldn't have said all of that
No.
because I found in your collection the way that you weight the words against each other to me is very Morrison-like.
Hmm.
And I was very startled. Like I expected you to be very, very good, but I did not expect a Toni Morrison shine. I was just like,
Sweet.
holy cow. So I've reread it twice and I have to read it again because I have to sort of put my sunglasses on and be like, all right, there's a lot of like shining writing and I've got to look past that for the stuff underneath. Um,
Mm.
so I was really amazed by it, and I'm going to do. I'm just going to pick out some words and phrases and just read them, um, just to give people an idea of what's going on. Um, from Aren't You Afraid? I tramp and tussle from retribution. They told me I'm the sludge they kick laughing. I said I'm huge, hot, and shining. Oh, and from earlier in this poem too, I am not fit to stand near their shoes, and I told them I'm Panther Soft. I mean, Panther Soft is like killing me. And from rooting along with the mouths and minds of listed ancestors, and the end of that poem, I grow, I grow, I grow from without control. I embody the next new in the dark shallows I am here. I decided. Let's see. Oh, from Because Tigers Won't Change Their Stripes. How they'll call our culture's baby bones. How they'll tell us we're mewling about corpse problems. Who knows how they'll foam and caw. And from in Daddy's house, no slippage from the eye ducts. Forget all your crooked, leaking scars. Stay there thinking about blue, even while folks snatch your shoulders, shake your back to pain. You stay there even if your whole life is screaming. So I have this book like marked within an inch of its life. Now
Sweet. That's really sweet. That's so kind of you.
it's not sweet. It just is. Now we're both FIU alums of the creative writing program. And you mentioned Denise Duhamel, who is a spectacular teacher.
Absolutely.
Like, I remember the first poem I read in her class, which was Remote. It was so god awful that the room was sort of stunned, like, what on earth? But Denise came in there with her lovely voice and she had good things to say. And, she was just encouraging you. And I remember further along in the class, she's like, "Oh, you're finally getting line breaks." I was like, "Yes, girl." Did you ever have the chance to was Julie there when you were there?
Yeah, she was there.
Julie?
She had just come in my very last year, so I didn't get a chance to take a class with her because I was doing my thesis. So I didn't get a chance to take a class with her. And it's funny because because I was doing hybrid stuff and she was doing lyric essays and I'm like, oh my gosh, that would have been amazing to take a class with her. So, but I wasn't able to. But she blurred my first book, so that was very generously. So that was some interaction with her. Yeah, she's great. She's fantastic.
Yeah, you come out of her class thinking you've got the eye of the tiger. That's actually what I read about your tiger bro. That was big to her. You're like, okay, I'm gonna submit to 100 journals, and I might just get admitted to 2. That's what I'm gonna do because Julie told me I'm good enough, and here I go. And she fills you up with this sort of fire, and she makes you ready, like for it. She's really something else. And I am very lucky to call her a mentor. So one of the things that I really love about the poem, when you sent the manuscript out, did you have the sections done as you have here?
Yeah.
They work really well.
Thank you.
I'm always that's one of my things that fascinate me, like how a poetry collection is put together. And I think I took Richard Blanco's class on that. And I think that so helped me because my collection was taken quickly as well. And I think it was because of the way it was put together. Because I understood how to put a collection together so that it has a narrative arc to it. So the first part is really singing like an Afro-Latina song. And it has a lot to do with family. I particularly love the way that the poem, Because Tigers Won't Change Their Stripes, mentions your father, Daddy, and then the next poem is in Daddy's house. So like that little thread, I just love it. And then you do the same thing for your mother as well. There's 2 poems that go together. That's Mommy, and then In the Meadow, and that's just really, really beautifully done. I wanted to ask about the name of the collection. how did you come to name it?
Yeah, so there's a poem in the I think it's the second section that's called Kinds of Grace. And it was when I was in Fort Pierce, kind of recovering, teaching from remotely and kind of just figuring myself out. I went to the beach and I saw this little baby shark that had washed up on shore. And there was this crowd around it, and they were just like, "What do we do with it?" Like, and they were just having this conversation about it. And then I just watched the sea kind of slowly kind of take the baby back, the shark into the ocean. I was like, "That's Grace." Just like everyone's debating what to do with
Mm-hmm.
this subject. Everybody has an opinion about it. Everybody, even the subject itself doesn't know what it feels. But Grace and I think of Grace and um, this sort of reconciliation of the self sometimes. And the ocean kind of represents that, taking it and taking that baby shark back. So yeah, so that's kind of what I was trying to go for. But that's anyway, so that's the poem. That's the poem, but I got the idea for the title from that poem because I thought, this book really deals with sort of like I was saying, that reconciliation of the self, of going from this one place where you think everything should be like this, or that you can even come in with all that sort of bravado, with all, loving your family and being part of this, interesting culture that you care about. But then you can still have moments of weakness. You can still have moments of shame. You can have moments of frustration. Um, and you can still kind of walk through that to the other side. So I think that there were different types of grace to me that were in the book. And there were different representations of that. So I thought that, okay, maybe that's more of the overarching theme, that it's about kind of finding that, giving yourself grace and giving that grace to yourself. And then, allowing yourself to give yourself to something that's even greater than yourself, whether it's romantic love, whether it's spirituality, whether it's your family. So those are the types of things I was thinking about when I put that title in there. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it works really well in that so many of the poems are expressing a different type of grace.
Mm.
Um, so I, as a reader, I personally love where the collection is called something, and then there's a poem in there that's named. It's like an Easter egg. I'm like, oh yeah, I found it. I
I
love
didn't do that in my first collection, but I decided to do it with this one. I was like, I didn't do that with I didn't do it with the first poetry collection, but I decided to do it with this one. So,
Yeah, I loved it. Um, One of the things that I really appreciated about this as well is the rawness and honesty of it, um, especially in poems like Ugly, um, where you're talking about a little white girl basically saying you're ugly and shit colored because of your skin tone. And then the grace in that poem is when you call her ugly and tell her she can't be a princess because she's ugly, but then you carry the guilt of that despite how she was coming at you, the fact that you hurt her, and that, well, the speaker hurt her and was very sensitive about it and felt guilt even though this person was cruel. um so that poem is expressing a very interesting dichotomy that I think a lot of sensitive people bear, where they experience bullying, but when they push back, like if especially it's in anger and you
yeah,
lash out at somebody and you
right.
watch the pain you cause, whereas that bully doesn't have the self-awareness to not do
Yeah,
that.
right.
So I love the complexity of
Hmm.
that poem.
I appreciate that.
And that it's not just like like she was cruel to me and I was cruel back, and then we're all going, yeah, be cruel to that stupid little girl. You know, there's another layer of humanity, um, which I think is true. It's a type of truth that now, like social media makes me laugh so hard on so many levels
Yeah.
because everybody's looking for this mythical mic drop moment. Like you'll make this statement and then somehow it's such a mic drop moment that it changes your life in some way.
Well,
And that doesn't exist because there's a lot of messiness as humans that we have to tolerate. One flash statement here or there is not going to amount to a hill of beans.
Yeah.
So when I go on there and like people start fighting and like each one of them is vying for their mic drop moment, I'm like, okay, that's not gonna work at all. What you need to do is, or nobody wants to, well, no, I shouldn't say nobody wants to hear, but it's very difficult, is you need to sit in each other's humanity. And I got that from this Black man. I don't know if you've heard of him. Can't remember his name. But he basically befriended so many active Ku Klux Klans members. And they, after they got to know him, and he didn't come in like, my agenda is to show you my humanity. He didn't. He just befriended them, and he would talk to them, and he would be kind to them, and have conversations with them. And inevitably, they would say, you know what? If you, as a Black man, are this person, then what I believed about Black people is not true. And I have to walk away from the Klan because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they give him the ropes. He's got like 200 ropes. And I always think of him when I have to deal with somebody or I'm encountering somebody who's like difficult or their stance is just completely opposite of me. And that's what you need to do, right? You need to present your humanity to their humanity.
Yeah.
And it's a process. So, yeah, that was a big segue. But to me, like in this poem and in the other poems where you're very raw with mental health struggles, it's like you are bearing your humanity to us in a very vulnerable way. And I think it's so valuable because there's so many people, young women and young, people who go through so much mentally, physically. And when they look out there, they just see all of this perfection bouncing around, dancing around. Like even now, there is like a type of language, like a perfected language for, I'm doing self-care. And I can't take on what you're going through right now because I'm taking care of myself. But there's this tinge, it's a distinct tinge of fakery and canned language. So it doesn't really mean anything. People are like, oh, well, I'm going to be selfish. So I'm going to say, I'm doing self care now. I can't deal with you because I'm doing self care. I'm serious.
Yeah, it's real. It's real.
So I think collections like yours are very important because they say this is what we go through as humans. Can you talk about some of the poems where you're discussing your mental health struggles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was important to include in the book because I could went back and forth with that. I was like, should I not? But then I was like, you know what? I have to write honestly and authentically to myself. And I felt like those were poems that needed to come out. Those were poems that I needed to write, and I thought that they needed to be in the book. And I think the way I structured it was, um, I wanted the speaker to come off out of the first collection, like square off with a sense of kind of empowerment, with sort of like, I've been through this, I'm ready to go. But I also wanted this tinge of vulnerability and also the impact of some of the things that may have happened in Scar and Scar Off, or some of the things that may have happened to the speaker. The sort of psychological effect on that, and not just on this individual person, but the sort of systemic psychological effects that some of these, the patriarchy or these sort of flawed systems have on our kind of individual psyche. So I thought that, okay, so that's something that I want to explore. And it was hard to write those poems. I think that some of those poems were some of the hardest things to write. They came out really fast, but they were more difficult to write because I had to access a part of myself that I didn't normally access. And then the biggest thing is I was putting it in a book. I was just like, okay, Scar on Scar Off. I talked a little bit about sexual assault and how women kind of deal with, the patriarchy and all these things. But how and also racism and sexism and all those things. But it didn't feel it felt personal, but I think this book felt very, very personal in a way, because I used a lot of different voices in that Scar on Scar Off, and I was able to kind of like give a pastiche of different people dealing with things. So I can tap into my fiction brain a little bit there. But with this one, it was very raw. So I think that was the first time I was really writing it to that place. And I felt it was authentic to me. So I thought, okay, I'll put it in the book, I guess. But it wasn't easy, but I'm happy I did it.
Um, when you mentioned in our like our sort of warm-up conversation before I started recording that the poems helped you to work through things, and I was having a very bad day. But I'll just put my son is 19 and he's a jerk. Okay. And he was being a jerk today. And I just was having it. I wasn't feeling great and I was helping with something. He was just being very entitled. Um, and I just was done at that moment. And like sometimes I had fantasies like, what would my mother do if he was her son? Couldn't be her grandson because she would have given him everything. But if he was her son, it would be different. Um, so I work through a lot of things with my writing. Because I'm just a person that's very expressive and I am very in tune with my emotions and I'm not afraid of them and talking about them. And a lot of people, like, emotions terrify them, like vulnerability terrifies them. So I'll just, start talking about whatever and they'll be like, yeah, do you realize how close the David Beckham Stadium is to our town? I didn't realize how close it was. Like I'm just talking about all, so they cannot handle it. And it's especially the way I'm coming at them because I'm not like really couching it. I'm not like creeping up on it. I'm just like, and I just dump it. Yeah. So I think my writing really helps me to work through quite a lot. The poem I read earlier is about a very difficult friendship I have, where on the one hand we're extremely close to each other, but then he'll just pull away almost like I don't even exist in the universe, and I just don't understand how that can happen. I don't understand it. So instead of talking to him for the 40th time, and getting the same result, I'll write it about it. And that brings me to a place of peace.
Yeah.
I don't have to have the 40th conversation with him again. Right. And let him be how he is. So I wanted to talk about the first poem in the second collection, which is called Diagnosis. And I love this poem so much for multiple reasons. Because at the beginning of the poem, I'll just read it. I am cooking and I get the diagnosis on the phone. And after I finish talking to the mental health nurse, I call my mother and she says, "What are you cooking?" And that is so like Caribbean mother. And then you guys start talking about the rice, why you keep burning the rice. And then she realizes that something's off. And she asks you specifically about it. But you were like, I'm talking about this rice. I'm not talking about that. And that was for me such an authentic moment, where there's more going on than talking about rice. Right. And there's a level of support in there that the speaker's not ready to talk about what's going on, but there is a level of support coming from the mother that I can feel because I've experienced support like that, where my mother is like, you don't do the chicken right. You've got to do this with the chicken, and that's why it doesn't come out right. Blah 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 blah. But she's giving more than talking about the chicken, and so I love that. But the additional layer for me is where, and she says, "Girl, the burned rice bottom is called piego."
Pegao? Pegao?
Pegao.
Yeah.
Pegao. And she says, many would say pegao is the best part. And my mother, who is from Barbados in the Caribbean, with that accent, she, I think one time I complained she burned the rice. And she said, the burn is the best part. That moment lives rent free in my mind, just because, like, the way she said it. So I've never heard that from anybody else. I didn't know if it was true or she was making it up at the moment, but here it is. The bird rice is the best part. Yeah, I took a long intro segue there, but would you mind talking about this poem and how it came about?
Yeah, I think this poem was the poem that made me realize that I was going to end up talking about my mental health sort of struggles. Because I kind of just finished that moment where I was just like, okay, so I got this diagnosis on the telephone. I found out what I was, and then I ended up having like a couple of other ones, but it was like fine. But I was like, okay, is this my fault? And that's what that poem is kind of dealing with, the sense of shame. So it's kind of, okay, so is this a reflection of something wrong with me? And then what ends up happening is that the speaker realizes through her mother and through cooking that this isn't a fault of hers. It's just a part of her. And it's a part of her that can empower her. It's a part of her that can help other people. It's a part of her that, it's frustrating and sad and terrible, but it's all those things. But it's not this thing that you should feel shame about. And I think that's what that poem I ended up realizing was more about. And then after that, I was like, okay, then I can talk about some of the other things, because if I empower myself to be able to talk about this, then I'm kind of giving myself that sense of power that I was looking for when I felt weakened by being labeled. So that's kind of what I was thinking about when I was writing that.
I mean, it's very evident, and this is one of the things I really enjoy in the collection, the multi-layered aspect of it, and the things that they're not binaries and it's not simple. So it's not like, oh yes, I'm a multicultural woman, and now I wrote a book, and look at me, I'm amazing. I had some struggles, you know. It's like a wave effect, It's like we go up the wave, we go down the wave, we go up, we go down. And this is what it is that you've laid bare here in this little section. And there's one part which I don't know if I'll be able to find, where you were talking about, things were so dark or so black, and like here you are again, something like that. And the reason I think that collections like yours have so much value is because, and I'm sure when you're in that depth of despair, it's over. Everything's done. There's nothing else. It's completely finished. Right?
Yeah.
There's no way up. There's no way out. Never gonna teach. Never gonna do anything. Everything's over.
Yeah.
So a tool to get out of that space is to know that other people have made it out of this space.
Yes. So true. So true.
So, to see like a collection like this, I think it'd be very valuable for people to see that, because there's the other side. And I thought it was very interesting that a lot of I'll just call them mental health poems for lack of a term. They're not mental health poems, but that's
really fine. Yeah.
Are interspersed with planning, or the wedding, I love the poems. There's like 4 days before the wedding, 3 days, oh no, 4 days before marriage. And I love that word tweak because I said the wedding and this is before marriage, which is different than the wedding.
Right.
So I love that word choice because it's like, no, it's not the wedding, it's marriage, it's different. And then coming to wedding day. That's a really beautiful arc for me, and all interspersed together, especially because I think that people feel sometimes when they have, when they're not perfect, that they will never find anybody who will truly love them. Right? Especially now in our very superficial society. I'm laughing because I was on Reddit the other day, a natural hair forum, and I posted a picture, and I guess there's dudes that like hang out in there.
Oh no. Oh God.
And then I started getting messages from like 20 years ago on the chat thing. They used to go asexual patient, like they would start like the opening like that. So this guy was trying to ask me that basically, like, hey, like, where are you? And then he was like, how old are you? How old are you? How old are you? And I'm like, what is this? Am I like a pound of beef? You know, like how much does it weigh? Like, what's the grade here? I'm like, no, I'm out of here. I'm doing something else. And then he switched accounts and then just randomly rolled up on me. He's like, how old are you?
No,
and I should have been like, I think I'm your grandmother or something. I don't know. See, that would be the snarky person. But I didn't. So I think the juxtaposition with the mental health poems with and the intertwining with the idea of a loving partner is so important because in our like Tinder / Hinge / Bustle, whatever world, people who struggle with reality are not people other people would be interested in. That's sort of the narrative.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And you have to hide it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to be perfect with your perfect picture of somebody that doesn't exist that you're sending
yeah, exactly.
sending out for yourself. Let me see if I can. I just found the poem. Hold on. See if I can find it. Where it starts off with, Tiny Monster. Tiny Monster is a monster of a poem that's about the speaker having an attack of some kind. They think it might be a panic attack. And then the partner is right there, like offering comfort, which is not necessarily feeling a comfort at that moment. And then, but the last two lines kill me because it's like, before I pass out, I think about your face shining like a spotlight. So for me as a reader, this is such a difficult situation. It's so raw, and it's just like fraught with fear and confusion. And the end is like hope. Because the partner, what they're doing isn't necessarily helping the situation at that moment.
Right.
But they, and the love that they have to even be doing something is hope. And the light, there's a lot of light mentioned in this collection. I know there's lots of talks of light. And I love the metaphor of light for us and, you know, our souls. And this poem to me is real life because we do the best we can in that moment, which is not necessarily going to help anybody helping, but we're trying. And there's hope in the trying. There's hope in the affection. There's hope in the action. my mother calling me 12 times a day to talk about, snap peas and how to snap peas right, paprika and whatever,
Yeah.
So if I can teach this collection, I'm going to teach it. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just be like, oh, guys, here we
go. Yeah, that's so sweet.
It's not sweet. It is that good. So I just want to talk about one more poem. Dark Woman. And just the way that it's laid out makes me very, very happy. And it's like, to come across it, it is in the third section. And I love the way that it is arranged, because the first part is specific, cultural, about family. Then the second part turns inward to the speaker about their mental health, people they meet, and that's also specific. And then the third part sort of pulls out a little bit and is more general, more ethereal. But then, so I'm like, oh, okay. But then here's Dark Woman. And to find it here in this section, this is my poeting now, versus the first section. So yeah. I loved it that it took me from the first section and I'm feeling like, oh, I'm going here and now I'm going. And then Dark Woman pops up. This like, Black woman, here I am. Yeah. I'm Black and this is what it is. So it's like, oh, yay. So that note from the first pops up in the third. And I really, I loved it.
That was a good interpretation. That was it's great that you were able to see that, because I was trying to do that as well. I really fought whether I should put in the first or the last section, and
I know it's so hard. When you guys we're putting together a collection, you're there with that one, and you're moving it. You're like, well, maybe in the first, but no, maybe this goes with this. I put it in the third, but maybe more in the beginning.
Yeah,
no, we're struggling. We're trying.
We're trying, man. But I wanted to have a sense of strength at the end, but I didn't want it to be just a simple kind of I'm, I overcame everything. Everything's great now. I want it to be kind of kind of, some poems are strong, some poems weren't strong, and not necessarily not strong, but they were kind of a person that was still kind of dealing with their stuff. So, yeah.
And then the last poem is called Inevitable. And your titles are doing so much work. These titles are so good. Because if you have a great title that's very specific, you can be more amorphous in your poem, because you're saying to your reader, this is what it's about, okay? And then you sort of go off and all of your metaphors that aren't exactly concrete, but the reader has the clue because of the title. So you've got some great titles in here. And so Inevitable, but I know no matter what, the next moment comes, which for me is in such conversation with the first poem, which is Pass. So in the past poem, the speaker is struggling and coming to terms with the past. And then in the last poem, I know no matter what, the next moment comes. So the past is gone and we're looking forward. But it's not and then we look to the future, So it's not, it's unexpected language that's a little bit sidestepping. So I thought that was a beautiful nod to the first poem and created a really beautiful arc. Why did you pick that poem to be last? Or did you have a thought?
I wrote that poem for myself, actually. That poem I wrote for myself, and I said, should I put this into the collection? And then I was like, yeah, I think I should. Because I think that sometimes when you're dealing with really bad, like a panic attack or a bad episode or something, I've had to deal with those, obviously. Um, you don't know that the next moment's going to come. You think that kind of what we were talking about before, that it's just over. Like there's black, like everything is awful and then it's just black. At least that's the way I've experienced it. But I think what the hope that I got from thinking about the next moment is that this is going to pass, kind of that this too will pass, that a next moment is going to come. And that next moment may not be the moment I'm living in right now, or I have the opportunity to change that moment, perhaps. So I wrote that for myself, but then I thought, you know what? This is the poem that I want to end on. This is a poem that is supposed to, that I wrote to inspire myself. So perhaps others will get something from it. But I also thought it was kind of a good way to kind of end the collection because I didn't want it to be an easy ending and I didn't want it to be, too prescriptive. So I was just like, okay, but I did want a little bit of very direct hope in there. So I think it ended up being what I was looking for. So that's what and I did want it to speak to the first poem in the collection. The first poem was always going
Ooh,
to, yeah. So that was
okay.
intentional. So you're like in my brain. You're just like, oh, this is what you were doing. I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was totally.
Did you take Richard Blanco's class on how to write a
I
poem?
did not. I did actually. I mean, I would have loved to have Richard Blanco as a professor. That would have been amazing. Oh man, he wasn't there when I was there, so that's
Oh man,
incredible.
poor Richard. He has to deal with me, and I've told him, I'm so sorry, Richard. I'm so sorry. I'm so much. I'm so sorry.
I'm sure he loves you so
And he's
much.
like, "You're fine. You're fine." Um. So thank you so much. Just to reiterate,
Yeah.
Kinds of Grace, and you guys should go out and get it. Stay tuned for the podcast. You should like and subscribe because we're going to have another conversation, which is our traditional bring a poem conversation. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me today. This is one of my go-to books, along with Margaret Atwood's Two-Headed Poems and Ada Lamone's The Carrion.
That's
Thank you.
yeah, I'm so honored. I'm just so honored. But I'm so honored and thank you so much for inviting me. This was so fun. You're such a perceptive reader and I really, really appreciate you. And just an incredible, incredible poet. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Each Bring a Poem. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, like, review, and share. This tells the algorithm that this podcast is something others would enjoy. Until next time.